In this challenging lesson, we're going to bring it all together. So now that you've learned all about SSIS in small micro lessons, we're going to give you a nice little challenge now to see if you really learned this. So to start with, let's unzip the Lesson49 data file that you can find on the ROC's website into a new directory called C Input Files. While you're unzipping that, also create an archive folder as well underneath that. So as you load each of those files, there's hundreds or dozens of files inside of that zip file. And you want to create a process that will load each of those files individually inside of a loop. And as you load each file, count how many rows you're loading and audit the fact that you loaded that file on that day. And here's how many rows you loaded. After doing that, you also want to archive each of those files into the archive file that you created. And make sure that you load the file with the proper zip code length of 5 digits. The final challenge here is after you load this, you want to make sure that you can't load the same file twice. In other words, if the mainframe group uploads the same file again to you to process, you want to put some type of check in there which will prevent you from loading that file the second time. So let's begin. Okay, I'm going to begin by creating a new package 10 in my case, and I'm going to create a connection to the AdventureWorks 2008 database. Now I've already done some preparatory steps here. I first created the input folder, so the input files folder, with the archive folder. I unzipped all the files into the directory, and I also ran the script, and this script can also be found in the ROC's directory, called Lesson49 create.sql. This creates the necessary tables that you're going to load. Okay, so voter load audit is my auditing table, and petition table, which is down here, is the table I'm actually going to load. So let's begin by first creating our connection manager, which we've already done. We also want to create a new flat file connection manager, and we'll point to any file in that directory. Call this extract. I'll point to my input files directory. I'll pick any DAT file I want to, or any CON file, excuse me. So I'll pick all files. This is any DAT file, this with a con extension. I'll see the column names in the first row. When I go to columns, notice the double quotes here. Double quotes mean I need to put double quote right here because it's a quoted text qualifier. When I go back, I'll hit the reset button to reset the metadata of this. Okay? If I go to the advanced, I can fix all these, although I know in my case, a 50 is fine. So I'll hit OK. Let me drag a data flow task over. Inside the data flow task, we have a very simple data flow to do. I'm going to drag a flat file source over, open it up, point to my extract. Good, hit OK. I also want to do a derived column transform. This derived column transform is going to change the zip code to make sure they're all 5 characters in length. So let's look at our zip code column, which is a zip. I'll drag it down. And to make it 5 characters, I'll do a substring, making a substring from 1 to 5. And I'm going to replace the zip column. Hit OK. The last step here is to count how many rows that I have, the row count, and then lastly write it to a OLEDB destination. So let's drag the row count down, drag this down to here, and before we can do that row count, I'm going to go to my control flow, make sure nothing is selected, and create a new variable. I'm going to create the variable by right-clicking the variables pane and hitting a new, but make sure nothing is selected before you hit the new button. So I'll call this variable row count and make sure it's scoped to your package name. If you see it's not scoped to your package name, well, that means you probably selected a task before doing that. Okay, so I have the default count of 0, perfect, and I'll go back to my data flow tab. The reason why I had to go back is because in the row count, notice there's no new variable option here, so I had to have the variable created before I do that. So there's my user row count there. Hit OK, and that was in the row count transform. And then lastly, go to the OLEDB destination and point that to the file destination. That file destination in my case is petition data. Go to mappings to confirm it all maps, looks perfect, and hit OK. You will get some truncation warning here, and that's completely fine in our case. Let's go back to the control flow. And let's just make sure real quick this package will work. Hit execute task to make sure that the package will work. And as you can see, it most certainly does. Okay, so we did load some data there. That's no problem at all. It's just an example. So my next step is to do some looping. So let's drag a for each loop over, drag that into the container, double click on the container, the for each loop container, to configure the loop. Let's go to our collection, and in order to see the for each file enumerator, I have to hit the drop down box and select for each file enumerator again. At that point, I can point to my input folder, input files folder, loop over any DAT file, get the fully qualified file name, and map it to a variable which we don't have yet, so I'll just select new variable. I'll call this variable file name. Hit OK, and hit OK again. So now we're looping over the variables. The only thing we're not doing is assigning that variable to this connection manager here. Select extract, go to your expressions right here in the properties window. So select extract, go to your properties window, see expressions, and hit the ellipsis button. You want to modify the connection string property to be equal to that variable of user file name. Hit OK, hit OK again, and now when I fire it off, it'll load a different file each time. Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. Now just know this, that it will, I'm loading fake data here, so obviously I'm loading data into a table. See the different rows though? So you're seeing 1,000, 5,000, really quick, 200 rows. So my loading part is now complete and polished. The part I need to do next is I need to archive that file. So let's send it to a file system task to archive the file. To archive the file, I'm going to tell it to move the file. Which file do I want to move? I'll pick the source connection here of extract. And my target table, or my target destination here, a file folder in my case, is going to be a new connection. For that new connection, I'm going to pick existing folder, and I'm going to browse to my folder. This folder in my case is the input files folder underneath archive. So it's this folder right here in my case. Hit OK, and I'm going to say if the file exists, go ahead and overwrite that file. That's completely up to you. Hit OK, and now we're archiving the file. We now need to audit the fact that we did all this. So I'm going to drag an execute SQL task, connect these two together, double click on it, and I've already kind of written some of the logic. I'm going to point to my AdventureWorks 2008 database, and I've written some of the logic right here. So I'm going to paste this in. I'm inserting into my voter load audit these three columns, and these question marks that you see here and here represent variables I'm going to pass in. My first variable, notice, is the name of the file, and my second variable is the number of rows I loaded. Let's go back over to here. Under my parameter mapping, I'm going to hit add variable twice. My first question mark, as I pointed out, was the file name. And my second question mark was the row count. Now we only have two variables here. My file name, though, is a varchar, and my number is a row count. So we're good there. Long as a row is a number. I need to change the parameter name now, which is the second column there. It says parameter name, to 0 and 1. This basically means that the first question mark is mapped to this one, and the second question mark is mapped to this one. Hit OK, and our last step in the requirements is a check to make sure the file does not exist, or has not been loaded. Excuse me. So I'm going to drag over one more execute SQL task, connect it up, double click on it, and this time my SQL statement is going to be a little different than anything you've seen before. I'm going to connect to my AdventureWorks 2008 database, and as you can see over here, this is my voter load audit table. One of the columns is my load file. So I want to say select count star from voter load audit, where load file is equal to question mark. So that holds my file name here. The question mark is a variable we want to pass in, which we've already done once before. User : file name. It's going to be a varchar, like we've already discussed. Its parameter is 0, it's only question mark. And then next, I want to get the result coming back. It's going to give me a count. I want to store that count into a row, into a variable. So go to my results set page, hit the add. I'm going to store the variable 0. That could be a column name or the ordinal position of the column name. And I'm going to store this into a new variable, which is scoped to the package, and it's going to be an integer. And this integer is going to hold how many times I've loaded the file. So I'll call this file loaded, and I'll make them default to -1. Hit OK, and hit OK. Oops, I think I made a mistake there. I did make a mistake. Okay, let me go back here real quick. One more time again. See, I made the name of the variable. Well, I flipped it around, in other words. Hit OK. My name of my variable should be file loaded. Keep the namespace the same. Last time I had the namespace something different. And an int32 again, -1. All right, second time's a charm. Okay. So I'm going to delete this variable right here because it's a little bit extraneous now. Delete. Okay, so now I have my 3 variables. This stores the file name, this stores the count of rows, and this stores whether it's been loaded or not. So to now conditionally fire off this step right here. So if the file has not been loaded, I want to fire off that step. So to do that, I'm going to double click on this green line. I'm going to set this to an expression and constraint, and I want to see if that variable is equal to 0. If it is, that means that the file can be loaded. Otherwise, I want to drag this green line down to the archive step. I want to archive it either way. So in this case, I'm going to double click on this green line, and I want to set this expression and constraint, and I want to say now if the variable name is greater than 0. So if it's greater than 0, that means it has already loaded, and I want to send it this way. Now I have one bug in my code here. I'm going to run this and watch what happens. You'll see in this case, each file is loading perfectly, but this is never firing off. The reason for that is right now, this and this, both of these green lines have the value weighted true to go to this next step. This is an AND condition. We have multiple lines going into it. To fix that, I'm going to pick any green line that goes into that step and change it to a logical OR. Now, either one of these green lines can be successful to kick off this step. So let's execute this one more time here and watch what happens this time. Oh, and I have an error. So let's go ahead and debug this. To debug this, let's go to the progress page. And as you see here, you may have to copy this message in the notepad. I intentionally gave this error so you can kind of see what this looks like, because I'm sure you're going to see quite a bit of these yourself. I'm going to copy this in the notepad, paste it in, and you can see the error. In my case, it's a simple variable. This is a common error in this case. Incorrect syntax near this, probable reasons for this, so it's a result set error. Now this is a very generic error from this, but it's telling me my query is bad in my case. So incorrect syntax, just like it means. Let's go back over to here again and look at our syntax. So as you can see, I forgot to wrap these in parentheses. So there's plenty of commas there. Hit OK, and hit OK again. And let's run this one more time. And there we go. So this time, everything's loading fine. And as you can see here, all the files did move to the archive folder. Here's all my files. So this time, I'm going to move all these files back into my input folder. And this time, we should see no files go on the other path. Let's run that one more time. So a few new files there, but everything else is going this way. So it went super fast that time. And I also have one new zip file. I can drag that new zip file which is this right here, the next day, this contains several new files. If I paste that in here, I'll get several new files and many old files. So I'll run this one more time. You saw that flash quite a few times because they're all new files this time. So again, just a recap here, the execute SQL task here is counting to make sure that how many rows have been loaded. If it's been loaded more than once, it goes directly to the file system task. If it hasn't been loaded more than once, as you can see it's been loaded more than once because of this, it'll go this way, this task here. This is so if the count comes back as 0, that means this. Next I load the file, I archive the file, and then I audit the fact that I just loaded it. Go ahead and execute this one more time. If there's nothing to load, it should turn green. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. This lesson was to bring it all together and show you looping, show you auditing steps, control flow, and data flow, and how to use the variables properly.